Hey, I'm Pete Griffin, and you're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com. We're coming to you today on location at the Fillmore Theater in Detroit. We're actually on stage, and in about 2 hours from right now, this stage will be filled with Tosin Abasi, Zach Wilde, Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen, and Nuno Bettencourt, at times all at once. Yep. But there are only a couple of people that are going to be up here for the duration of the entire show, and one of them is our good friend, bass player Pete Griffin. How you doing, Pete?
I'm good. I'm a little tired from this tour, but we're doing good. It's a lot of fun. So.
Well, that's good. I think you'll get a surge of energy when those guys come out.
That's what happens. Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. We did an interview on for BassPlayersOnly.com. I was reading it this morning. Would you believe that was way back in 2011?
Wow.
And you gave us the whole story about your upbringing and the time you spent in Chicago, and you went to Northwestern, and the things that you learned from Steve Rodby that I thought was very interesting. And I think you were taken aback by some of the things that he said to you, and you learned quite a bit. That interview is up there. Just put in a little search thing, Pete Griffin, and that'll pop right up. You'll get the whole story. And we talked about Dweezil Zappa some, but that was a minute ago, 2011. A lot has happened since then. I know you can't tell us everything that you've been up to, but maybe a few highlights of what's been going on in your musical career since we last spoke.
Yeah, sure. Well, strangely enough, 2011 is when I left the Zappa band. We did a tour in England that wound up being my last tour with them. Mostly just because it was time to move on. That gig was a dream come true for me, being the biggest Zappa fan you could find.
Did you get paid by the note? That would have been really...
That's a joke that comes up a lot on this tour, trust me. But no. And then after that, I did a tour with Dethklok, which was the cartoon metal band from the show Metalocalypse, which was a blast. With Gene Hoglan on drums and Mike Keneally on guitar and Brendan Small on guitar, who's like the creator of the show.
But Brian Beller was in that band before.
I was subbing for Brian Beller for that. A very lucky position to have to follow up. Hi, Brian, with his gigs. And then after that, I've kind of just been jumping around from a bunch of different bands. I've kind of wound up in the way I wound up in this world. In 2016, we did this tour first, and Steve had done the Zappa Tour as a special guest, the very first one in 2006. So a 10-year payoff of me just kind of emailing back and forth with Steve was that he needed a bass player for this madness, where instead of doing it like a G3, where it's 3 completely separate bands, it's one band with 5 different people. Kind of they're all at once, and then Tosin does 3 songs, and then he does a song with Nuno, and then so on and so forth, and then so they keep kind of crossing over, and there's a lot of collaboration, but then there's each personal set. So it winds up being a 3.5-hour show of all guitar players. It sounds like hell, but
in a good way.
Yes, exactly. If you're a guitar fan, I mean, come on, there's nothing better. But as a bass player, it sounds like it might be a little tough, and it is. But what's really cool about it is that because the frontman changes every half hour, and they all have vastly different styles. Like Tosin stuff is this new proto jazz metal, like crazy time signatures and all that stuff. Nuno has his sort of funky pop thing going on. Zach does some classic rock covers and takes long solos where there's a lot of improv going on. Steve has Steve's thing, which is very unique. Yngwie does his amazing neoclassical thing, which is with thrash metal tempos and all that stuff. And so kind of it all together, it winds up using pretty much a ton of different tones, a ton of different techniques. I'm trying to figure out what percentage of the show I do with fingers and what percentage I do with a pick and what percentage I'm slapping, and it's kind of all over the place. You
have to change hats every half hour or so?
Yeah, basically. And there's some where I'm like stuck back behind my amp, and there's some where I'm running around on stage with the guys, and it's fun. It keeps me busy. The 3.5 hours goes by pretty darn quickly. But it's tough, and but what's really cool is there's just a lot of mutual respect with everybody, and the band are all very appreciative of the work that we're doing, and vice versa. And now that we've been out for a couple weeks, things are settling in, and I'm sleeping well on the bus. I sleep great on a bus, so.
I caught some of the sound check, and everybody seems to like everybody else.
Yeah, it's crazy having 5 headliners all on a bus together. but they all love each other, and
Doesn't sound like there's any ego
no,
getting in the way.
strangely enough, I mean, like they've all. I think that was part of maybe they had to sign something coming onto this gig to just be able to get along. But everyone's got the same goal, and it's pretty cool. So basically, since the Zappa world, I've kind of wound up in this more shredder guitar world, where I've also done tours with Tony McAlpine, and I played on his last two records.
Excuse me, he's doing okay now? Or?
Yes. What was funny is the first record I did with him was right before he got diagnosed with cancer. And then he basically, you can't say he beat it. He can't technically say that, but he's doing great. Like really, really great.
Because I've interviewed Bunny Brunel a couple of times, and I know he's done a lot of work with him. Cab, right?
Yeah. And Tony's just an amazing person, so for that to happen to him was a shame. So I'm so happy. And then the record, the EP that we just did, with Gergo Borlai on drums, who's incredible. The music sounds like someone who fought cancer. Like the music is that fiery and passionate and stuff, and it's really worth checking out. I did a tour with Paul Gilbert, which was a blast. So yeah, I've kind of been lumped into this kind of shredder guitar world, which is funny because I didn't really listen to it much growing up. I was listening way more to the Frank Zappa stuff and Miles Davis and Weather Report and more kind of jazzy, groovy stuff. But then I also recently did a tour with Carl Denson's Tiny Universe, which is a total jam band, where we kind of just sit on one groove for a while and make the kids dance and stuff. And that was a blast too, to be able to go from, hey, check out what I can do, to just like locking in with the drummer and playing the same thing over and over again for 10 minutes. While
Bass players understand that.
Exactly. It's like you said before, it's all about the different hats that we wear and things like that, So I'm very, very fortunate that I have both the hats in my closet, but also the ability to bring them all out at different times and stuff like that. I'm not just stuck doing the same thing over and over again.
Let's talk about your technique a little bit, because you cover a pretty wide swath here with everything. How do you approach, I mean, you mentioned briefly, you said fingers versus pick, but what else can you share about your bass technique?
Well, a lot of it depends on what I'm recreating, because I play a lot of, like with the Zappa band, I would try to get close to whatever because Zappa's bass players are basically my biggest influence combined, between Patrick O'Hearn and Scott Tunis and Tom Fowler and Arthur Barrow. They all kind of, like, Patrick's fretless and Scott plays with a pick and Arthur played with a pick but did a lot of slapping stuff, and so they all kind of have it all different. So with that, I would try to get at least the tone that they had from the original recording, and that's the same thing that I use when I approach stuff like this. With Zach here, we're doing a couple Sabbath songs, so I'm trying to get like sort of a geezery kind of tone where it's mostly fingers, but it still has the point to it. Nuno stuff was all played with a pick originally, so I use a pick for that. Tosin stuff is super interesting because there's not even really any bass on it. It's 2 8-string guitars that they play with live, and then they'll have the bass on track. So I've had to sort of like determine a bass line within the record and then have my own approach to that. So that's actually been super challenging because I was a huge fan of his music already, and was always I've known him for years and was always kind of bugging him, being like, "What's your problem with bass players, man? Like, why don't you tour with the bass players?" So this was a really cool example to kind of to get into that. And that has me doing pick, and Tosin does this amazing slapping stuff on his 8-string guitar that I cannot possibly keep up with. It's really incredible. The show kind of features it. So I've had to break that back out, and the double thump thing, and like the Victor Wooten style that I studied 20 years ago, and then kind of put away to go play pop music, and now I suddenly have to break the slap chops out again. It's
Boy, there's a lot that you've got to do. I'm sure it's never boring, and I'm sure it really keeps you on your toes, even if you've played the show once or twice or 10 times or whatever. So.
And that's also what's fun about the layout of the show, is that there's some stuff that is exactly the same every night, and then there's some parts where we have no idea what's going to happen. Like there's a couple parts, even in Steve's set, where he really wanted to have a moment where he can just kind of go off and improvise, because he's seeing this tour as like a vacation, because he only needs to be on stage like 40 minutes a night instead of 2.5 hours, like for one of his normal shows. So he's making sure he's having fun, and that's actually really great. And our drummer JP Bouvet is just such a blast to play with and tour with. So it's cool. New stuff happens every night for sure, in an exciting way, and then sometimes in a frightening way. But we fix that. So
even the fright can be exciting.
Exactly.
Tell me about your gear.
I've been using Ashdown amps for pretty much my entire career. They've been very, very good to me. The Goudet family are just they're just really sweet people.
Know them well.
Yeah, exactly. And they've been really cool. They actually had a slight problem with one amp, and they had another one to the next venue like a couple days later. Which that kind of support is greatly appreciated. And that's always been my tone. Like when I'm using backline and I see that there's an Ashdown, I walk up and I give it a hug because I'm like, I know what you're going to sound like. You know, a lot of other amps, even from unit to unit, you don't really know. But I've used EBS gear for a long time, both their pedals, and I have one of their amps that I actually really like a lot too for the more solid state kind of thing.
Old Ralph Bjurbo in Sweden.
Another great supporter, ultimately. So.
Hey, Ralph.
And so I have like a big part of my pedal board is the Microbass 2, which is like a preamp, but it also has the effects loop with the knob on it, which has been a lifesaver. I use MXR pedals, which are all pretty awesome for in terms of a mass-produced pedal. They really get it right, and they really make just usable stuff. Even little advancements they make. I just got their new sub-octave bass fuzz, and as an octaver, it's amazing. But I actually started using just the fuzz side to get that geezer tone that I was talking about, just to kind of sound like an amp just starting to break up a little bit. And for Tosin stuff and a little bit more of the metal stuff, I've been using the Dark Glass pedals, both the B7K and their newer Alpha Omega. And for that sort of down-tuned 7 and 8 string guitar, kind of fighting the other low frequencies, they really nailed that cut. You know, like they really found whatever that little notch is where all those other instruments aren't, and they make the bass really speak there.
Dark Glass has really become a much more prominent company just in the last few years.
And Doug is another really great guy. I met him a few years ago when I was touring with this band called Shining, out in Finland, and I've been really excited to see them get bigger and bigger as they go. As far as basses go, I've used Lakelands for most of my career, and then Dan Laken, the owner of that company, split off and started his own one. So I have a Lakeland fretless with me, and then I have a D. Laken fretted, basically a P bass. It's his Bob Glaub edition, and the D. Laken for something that's crafted in, I think it's Korea, is a really just amazing instrument, especially for the price point. I'm really I like that I can endorse instruments that people can actually afford. You know, so it's like it's only about $1,000 bass. It's nothing. I'm not like playing some $5,000 thing that that I wouldn't have bought otherwise. And then I also have a Sandberg custom, which is an amazing. That's a little more high end, but that when anytime I have to play something that's physically challenging, I grab that bass because it just plays easier than most of the other ones.
What is the average number of strings on your basses?
I have 2 4s and 2 5s on this one, but they're all tuned differently. Actually, the 5-string and the fretless are too normal.
What's normal? Low
just
B?
E8, B and E8DG. And then the bass that I use for Nuno set, Zach sets, and Yngwie set, which is the D. Laken P bass, is down a half step because that's how all these guitar players love to do this stuff, to get that little extra rumble, and the kind of slacker string I think helps them a lot too.
You don't put a capo on there or anything?
No. And then, strangely enough, I have this other 5-string that I'm using for one of Steve's songs, because Steve has all these crazy tunings where he has an open C, and one of the riffs he's playing uses that open string so much that for me to try to play it closed would just be awkward if I was trying to play it fretted. So I have one that's a 5-string, but it's up a half step. So it's C, F, B flat, E flat, G.
Did I mention that you need to be really on your toes?
Yeah, and I'm doing all my own bass changes and all that, so it's interesting, and I got to remember to I have different tone changes for each bass. So yeah, I'm very much paying attention the entire time.
I hope so.
Yeah, but it's great. It keeps me on my tones. It means I sleep well at night too. A lot of times tour can be boring, and the excess free time can almost get dangerous for some people, and I don't really have that. I get a short little walk every day, and then I'm here in the venue, and that's my job.
Well, that's great. Yep. What about strings? I don't think you mentioned.
I use Dunlop strings. I got an endorsement with them somewhat recently, and I love them. Chris Johnson is my contact there, and he's another. He also works with MXR, because Dunlop and MXR are all sort of the same umbrella. So they're just feeling that support from people, especially when you're out on the road and you kind of need something pretty quickly. There's nothing better than that. It's one thing for the gear to be good to begin with, but to have someone behind it is for us who are out here in the trenches, that really that goes a long way in my book. So I've been using those a lot recently, and they're newer, super bright strings. You say super bright bass tone to me, and that's not exactly what I'm looking for necessarily. But those strings, they really kind of nailed it. They last longer. They maintain that kind of zingy brightness a little longer. And I've always liked that. And I've realized recently I like stainless better than nickel. But when I was doing the jam band stuff, I used the nickel for the slightly like softer tone, and those lasted super long too. They didn't go dead as quickly. So I'm in gear heaven, you know. And what's cool about this tour is I've been doing a lot of tours where there's more flying, so you can't bring as much. Yeah. This, we put everything on the truck in Burbank. I live in Burbank, where our last show is in LA. I'll be able to just have it dropped off at home, so I got to bring almost everything. Not everything, but 4 basses and my full rig and my full pedal board. That's more than I've been able to bring on a tour in a while. So just in terms of toys, I'm happy.
What about the future? What else would you like to do, or what else do you have planned that you may not have mentioned?
It's hard to tell. I've been playing in a bunch of what you would call super groups. One was called the Giraffe Orchestra with members of Mastodon, the Dillinger Escape Plan, Mars Volta, and Alice in Chains. We released a record about 2 years ago that I'm really proud of. I've been playing other people's bass lines for a lot of my career.
Juan Alderete, right?
From the Mars Volta, yeah. But this was all original music. And then I have another group called Legend of the Siegelman with Danny Carey from Tool on drums and Brent from Mastodon on guitar, and then a bunch of other amazing musicians. And that one I'm really excited about because we opened for Primus on New Year's last year.
Did you get to hang out with Les Claypool?
With Les a little bit, but what's even cooler was I hung out with Lur, the guitar player, because he wound up playing with us, and he's a huge Zappa fan. So he and I were totally nerding out on Zappa stuff all through the rehearsals. And
Les, if you're watching this, I'm still working on getting that interview. Yeah. I'm going to make it happen.
Give these guys a call. And I have met Les, and he's a total sweetheart. But with that band, Legend of the Siegelman, we're working on the next record, and for our crazy live show where we're all in costumes and stuff, when we get to tour, which we're hoping we will. It's a scheduling nightmare, obviously, with Tool's schedule and all this other stuff. But I've been music directing that band when we do it live, so I'm like very involved in just how it comes off musically, which is a whole different level of involvement. I have to know the guitar player's parts as well as my parts. But it's great, and we're working on the next record and helping to write for that, and so we should hopefully get that recorded this year. And then I think they're talking about doing another Generation X tour. And
this year, what year?
Sorry, next year, 2019. I mean, yeah. This year's already over. Like this tour runs right up until almost Christmas, and then so I'm already seeing well into the next year. So
yeah. Well, boy, there's a lot going on and a lot to talk about. We'll have to get together again and have you bring us up to date on all those projects. Yep. Let me ask you one more question. Mm-hmm. What would you be if you weren't a bass player? Something outside of music.
Wow. I've always said helicopter pilot. For some reason, that sounds really interesting to me. Unfortunately, I have vision problems, so I'm not sure I would ever be able to do it. But that just always seemed cool, to be like a traffic reporter and just kind of hang out in the sky and look down on other people's lives. And I don't know. I anytime I see in LA, there's one helipad right next to the highway that I'll always like see one kind of landing on. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, I wish I could have done that.
I think when we get stuck on the freeway, we look up. We'd rather be up there.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuck.
Yeah, especially in LA.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, listen, keep us up to date on all that stuff, and we will share that with these nice people here. Good luck with the tour. If they are coming, what is the official name of this tour?
Generation Axe is what it's called.
Love it.
Yeah.
Generation Axe, if it comes your way, by all means, don't miss it. I haven't even seen it yet, and I love it already. So, Pete Griffin, thanks very much.
Thank you, man.
And keep in touch. Let us know, and safe travels and everything else.
Awesome, thanks.
On location on the stage at the famed Fillmore Theater in Detroit, Michigan, with our good friend Pete Griffin. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.